Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. Pasta Jardula here.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Jonny Sue is still spinning on those ones and twos. And today we have a great guest for you as well. You might know her from Activism Munich, but we know her from Action for Assange. She's been on this case from the get-go. Mm-hmm. Taylor Hudak is live with us from London. How you doing, Taylor?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
How's the weather over there? How's it holding up?
It's actually pretty warm. I will say I did pack for more fall weather, but it's been warm the past few days, but it is still quite windy here.
All right.
Awesome. So let's get to it. Taylor, the Assange trial has resumed this week after a COVID sort of scare. Can you summarize what's happened so far this week, just the highlights?
Yes. So the hearing did resume early September, and this is now the second week of the hearings. And I could tell you on the first day of the hearings, which was a week ago on Monday, there was a huge protest, very elaborate protest. There was bands playing, people dancing. It was very showy. And there was also some really powerful and impactful speeches that were given by John Pilger, Rebecca Vincent, who is with RSF, Christian Rafferson, as well as Julian Assange's father, John Shipton. So a lot of support for Assange here in the UK, especially from the DEA campaign, which is the Don't Extradite Assange campaign. So far, I can say that one of the issues that we've seen with the case on the journalistic side, and journalists and NGO observers trying to cover the case, is the fact that we have all been given basically a video link, because COVID is obviously still happening right now, and there are still restrictions. So many journalists are having to cover this case remotely, and it's been difficult. Of course, it's been very difficult. Many of the witnesses are calling over Skype, so there's tech issues with the witnesses being able to communicate with the attorneys during the cross and direct examination. And then also too, on the first day of the hearings, 40 NGO observers and members of professional organizations, this includes Amnesty International, PEN Norway, and Reporters Without Borders, among many others. They went to go click on the video link to cover this hearing, and they were denied access. And then later that day, we learned that they were granted access on accident. So the judge revoked their access and ability to cover the hearing. Now, only one member of one organization has been able to then regain her access to cover this hearing. So it seems very clear that the people who are behind Assange's prosecution and persecution perhaps do not want this case being talked about in the mainstream media and independent media or anywhere at all. So it's really awesome that your show is choosing to cover this case. And I've watched your interviews before, and every time you speak to a politician or any person who's running for Congress, you always ask about this issue, and you always ask about Julian Assange and his treatment, which is super important. So I want to thank you guys for doing that.
Well, thank you for covering it. I mean, like, a lot of people aren't covering this in the United States, and I see he has a lot more support in the UK. Could you just comment a little bit on that?
Yes. So in the United States, there has been a new organization that has come about, and you could follow them on Twitter. I believe it's at I don't know the exact Twitter handle, so I don't want to provide it. I believe it's at Defend Assange, but it's a new organization, so there is some U.S. support that's new. However, Action for Assange, of course, has been a very big supporter of Julian Assange, and they've been doing protests and actions in D.C. during these court hearings. They did it back in February. They're doing it right now. So there is support in the U.S., but there's a very organized campaign as well here in the U.K. That's the DEA campaign, Don't Extradite Assange campaign, and it is the official WikiLeaks support campaign for Julian Assange. And like I said, the protests here were pretty big on the first day, and every single day there have been protesters and demonstrators outside the Old Bailey courthouse to show support for free press, free speech, and Julian Assange.
You know, it's kind of crazy. We saw the support from the Ecuadorians when he got taken out of the embassy, and I wish I saw the same type of support here in the United States. That's why we were always kind of wondering the support, the lack of support. I mean, you know, even some of the old school independent channels like TYT, not even talking about that. This is a shame. So aside from them cutting the feed from independent journalists and trying to suppress this case getting out, what strategically in the court, well, I don't want to say strategically, what in the courts was one of the worst things you've seen as far as what the lawyers are, what the judge has done law-wise? What's been one of the worst things that you've seen?
Yes, so I do have access to the video link, and I've been observing the court hearings and reporting on this. And I can say that right now we are seeing the defense put forth its case. So they've been calling defense witnesses for the past 2 weeks. Eventually, the prosecution will have the ability to do the same. But we've seen several defense witnesses. Now, on the cross-examination, which is when the prosecution or the U.S. government has the ability to question defense witnesses, they have very similar tactics for each witness. They're trying to discredit the witness and devalue their testimony. And then they are also seeking to ask questions that are they don't pertain to the issue at hand. It was very bizarre. One of the questions to one of the defense witnesses was, is it okay for journalists to break into the White House? Which to me, I was actually standing up, still listening to this, and I heard it and I go, wait a second, what is this about? So it seems very strange. The prosecuting attorneys are also not happy that some of the defense witnesses have answered beyond just yes or no, and they have further elaborated. So that is kind of the strategy that they've been using each day.
And just to clarify for the viewers who may not know, what avenue is prosecution by Lewis taking to find Julian Assange guilty?
Yes, so Julian Assange is charged under 18 counts. 17 of those are under the U.S. Espionage Act of 1917. They deal with his publication of classified material. And then one of the other accounts is conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, which is a very elaborate way of saying conspiracy to hack a government computer. So they are seeking his extradition to the United States so he could face trial on those 18 charges.
Is there any luck for the judge to grant people more independent media to see this trial right now? You said it was only one that got it, but Judge Vanessa, I believe her name is Barrister. Did I say it right? Okay.
Yes, Vanessa Barrister.
Is there any way that she's going to budge on as far as giving people access so we can see more of these tactics and everything that you're talking about going on?
No, I don't think so. They were very clear that you did have to submit a request to cover the hearing by a certain date. But it was, like I said, very interesting that people who were granted access, and again, these are professional organizations, they were actually denied access on the first day. I'm not sure if they are going to be given access again. It's unclear at this time. I don't think so. I think they would have received it already. But very few people are even allowed in the courtroom. 10 journalists were allowed to be physically present in the courtroom. And I'm sure that it's not independent or alternative media figures, at least the people that I've been working with that I know that are part of alternative and independent media, were not granted access into the courtroom. So I think that those seats were available for more mainstream publications.
Right, exactly. And so why is this case one of the most significant, if not the most significant, regarding freedom of the press and rule of law in our time?
Yeah, so it is the first time ever in history that the U.S. Espionage Act of 1917 is being used against a publisher and a journalist. So essentially, if Assange is extradited to the United States and he's tried and convicted in the U.S., this sets a very dangerous and chilling precedent for journalists worldwide. It also impacts the average person in the public because it infringes on people's right to know. So it would make it a crime to receive classified material, publish classified material. And Trevor Timm, who is the founder of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, who was a defense witness, even testified that it would be a crime for anybody to even read a report that has classified material. So it's very, very dangerous, and people should be taking this seriously. I'm telling you, when I'm watching these hearings take place and I see the prosecution put forth its arguments and its questions to the defense witnesses, I think to myself, how did we get here?
Yeah. This seems like a kangaroo court too as well. Like this is just all for show right now. Do you think there's any chance that Julian Assange can escape getting extradited to the United States, and maybe, you know, we can have some hope? And if he does escape extradition, what then?
It's an interesting point. Whenever I get asked this, it's very difficult to answer. I can say, though, that looking at the evidence that's been presented thus far, the testimony rather that's been presented thus far, it's been very, very strong in favor of the defense. Daniel Ellsberg, who is the Pentagon Papers whistleblower, took the stand today, and he said, "I will not fall for the trap of the Julian Assange bad, Snowden bad, Ellsberg good." He said, "I do not adhere to that ideology." And that was very impactful. And in fact, when the prosecution asked Daniel Ellsberg, and they were being kind of sarcastic about it, they said, "So these documents being released, is this all the government's fault?" And Daniel Ellsberg said, "Well, yes, it actually is." And then he went on to finish his answer to the question. But the case is very much in favor of the defense, but unfortunately, the judge has been ruling consistently in favor of the prosecution and the U.S. government. It's been like this for quite some time. In fact, the previous judge who was hearing this case, which is Lady Arbuthnot, she had to remove herself from hearing this case because she had serious conflicts of interest. She and her husband have both benefited financially from organizations that have been exposed by WikiLeaks. Her husband has been exposed by WikiLeaks. And so, therefore, she's very prejudicial against Julian Assange. She eventually had to step down from the case, but she has yet to formally recuse herself. And unfortunately, Lady Arbuthnot, the previous judge, she is still overseeing the current judge that is seeing this case, which is Judge Vanessa Baraser.
And, well, what if he is extradited? Where will he go, and what exactly will happen then? What is your prediction? Obviously, none of us know, but.
Yes, so we know that he will be tried in the U.S. Eastern District Court of Virginia, which is known as the Espionage Court. Mm-hmm. And no national security defendant has ever won a case there. This was an issue that was addressed in court the past few days, where there was discussion about what would happen to Assange if extradited. He is facing 175 years in prison. One of the defense witnesses, who was a criminal defense attorney, says it is highly likely he would receive the maximum penalty. And so he would be subjected to a very unfair trial. He would not be granted a fair trial by any means, because in this courtroom, the jury pool would be made up of intelligence or ex-CIA, ex-FBI, or members of their family. And this would not be a public case. There are certain groups out there that believe that we will hear all of the truth if Assange is extradited to the United States and he's put on trial. That's not true, because this trial would not be open to the public or the press. So it's very dangerous. And he would also be subjected to what they call SAMs. And so he would be put in solitary confinement, which is very detrimental to him, because he is he has been subjected to torture. And he would also not be granted necessarily the right to have confidential communications with his attorneys, which is a basic right that you have in the United States and in the UK. So it would be a very unfair trial, and it's very, very important that he is not extradited to the United States, because things would probably not end in the way that we would like.
I have to ask this question because I asked everybody when I talked to Action for Assange or any Assange people. Do you think the deal is still on the table from the Trump administration when Rand Paul went and asked if he testifies that they'll grant him immunity? I know you're going to probably say he won't do it and he shouldn't do it. Do you think that deal still exists?
That's very interesting. I'm sure Trump would love for Assange to come forward and give whoever the source was to the DNC leaks. I'm sure he would love that to happen, of course. If that's still on the table, I'm not sure. As you said, Assange is not going to give up his source, but he did say that the source of those leaks was not Russia, and it was not a state party. And he said that. So I think we should trust Julian Assange, whose media organization has a 100% accuracy rate in reporting.
Yeah.
We've recently seen just so many journalists in the United States come under attack of law enforcement for covering some of these protests, etc. How does this make you feel in relation to the Julian Assange trial, and what do you think journalists can do to fight back?
Well, one thing that was mentioned in court by one of the witnesses was that this is possibly an example of Trump's war on journalism, perhaps the Assange being extradited to begin with. But I do think that when the United States chooses to prosecute a non-U.S. citizen for violating U.S. law, it does sort of set the precedent or put in the mindset of many officials who are in power that journalism is not a profession to be respected. So we do set a standard when we act in a way where we are overreaching our territory as far as where we can prosecute individuals. What I mean by that specifically is the fact that Assange is not a U.S. citizen, and we should not be trying somebody who is not a U.S. citizen under U.S. law. So I think it just devalues the profession in general. We saw, of course, with Glenn Greenwald was charged in Brazil with very similar charges to Julian Assange. It has since been dropped. But I think that we can only expect more of what we've seen in the United States to happen if Assange is extradited. And I do want to say, too, that what's been happening to journalists covering protests is horrific. It's not something I covered directly, but I want to make note that I think it is horrific. It needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be discussed. Police should not be treating journalists this way. And journalists are not participating in a protest. They are there working. That's the difference. They are there working. They are not participating in the protest. There is no reason for them to be arrested by doing their job.
Jonny, do you have a question? Because I was going to ask one more question real quick. Go ahead, Ash. So my question is, I think there's also some questions right now with anybody who grabs a camera and says they're a journalist, and you have to kind of prove something. We're witnessing, like in these protests, they're trying to force us to get a sheriff's press pass. But we have, protection. We're a corporation over here, and we're
business.
We're a business, and I don't think we should have to. What do you think is going to be the future as far as how people have to, clarify themselves as a journalist, and what are the loops that, who says who determines who's a journalist or not? A citizen journalist or civilian journalist, we have the right to go out there and document stuff, film stuff, and put it out there. So what do you think the barriers are going to be, or the test is going to be for, the courts or anybody to say this person's a journalist and this person's just a YouTuber that's not considered a journalist?
I think we're only going to see that get worse, unfortunately. So not a very positive answer there, but I think that there's going to be respect only allotted to mainstream press organizations and corporate organizations who basically just provide the mainstream talking points and acceptable points of view. So I think that things like having to show a press pass is going to be a lot more common. Having to show press credentials is going to be necessary in order to gain access to cover an event, a protest, or what have you. So that's the point that we're at. That's not essentially how the First Amendment is set up, or how the U.S. Constitution is set up, because there's no definition of who is and who isn't a journalist. So journalists are not granted necessarily, and I'm speaking very broadly here, they're not granted special protections under the First Amendment, but the U.S. also doesn't distinguish, or the U.S. Constitution doesn't distinguish between who is and who is not a journalist. Yep. So essentially, if you have a camera and you're out there, you could film and you're a journalist and you could publish that information. But I think that even to gain access to be able to do these things, you're going to have to show press credentials, unfortunately.
Jonny?
Great. Yeah. So, Taylor, you're out there in the UK. I'm sure you've spoken to some blokes out there. Have you heard of Harry Dunn?
Yes. Good thing that you bring that up. So Harry Dunn was a young man living in the UK, and he was unfortunately killed by a woman named Anne Sakulas. She was driving on the wrong side of the road. He was on his bike, I believe, and she collided with him and killed him. Now, she is a U.S. citizen, and she has since gone back to the United States, and she is essentially wanted here in the UK, of course, and she is not being extradited to the UK.
Yeah.
But of course, Assange is going through his extradition hearings right now, and the reason for that is, well, number one, Ann Sekulas and her husband are ex-CIA. They have ties to American intelligence. And then also, too, if you look at the nature of the U.S.-UK extradition treaty, it's very unbalanced. It's far easier to extradite someone from the UK to the U.S. than from the U.S. to the UK. If you're extraditing someone or seeking to extradite someone from the U.S. to the UK, all you have to show is reasonable suspicion, which is a lower standard than if you are seeking to extradite someone from the UK to the US. You have to show, or I may have flipped this. If you're seeking to extradite someone from the UK to the US, you have to show reasonable suspicion. Whereas if you're seeking to extradite someone from the US to the UK, you have to show probable cause, which is a higher standard.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's uneven.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, the bully of the world, has more authority to make their own rules.
Exactly.
So she declared that she had diplomatic immunity, right? And then she left him there. She didn't really call an ambulance, right? That's how that situation happened.
I'm not sure of the details of what happened, but I'm aware of it in the context of how extradition it takes place between the U.S. and the UK. So I'm not sure of the details of what happened, but I do know that she essentially fled and went back to the United States and did not, I guess you could say she didn't cooperate, of course, because I'm sure that the UK authorities would have arrested her. So I guess one could assume that she did not cooperate. But even when one of I think it was Mike Pompeo, came over to the UK, the issue was never even addressed. It's so ridiculous. It was never even talked about. And this was I think, 19-year-old boy. It's terrible.
Something like that, yeah. It seems like there's a double standard being set because Julian Assange hasn't committed any crimes, and yet there's a CIA officer who murdered somebody, got to leave the UK, and then got to stay in the US and is still avoiding extradition and just a fair trial.
Yes, exactly.
Taylor.
Uneven.
I just wanted to just go over one more time if anything happened on the trial today that you want to highlight or yesterday. I know you mentioned Daniel Ellsberg, but anything else that you wanted to highlight?
Yes. So there has been, throughout this court proceedings, they have been saying that Assange is essentially not being charged with publishing classified material, but he's being charged with publishing the names of government informants, which is not a crime, actually. But that's what they're claiming they are charging him with. This, of course, has been sort of debunked by the defense in the court, because if you just look at the indictment, you will see he is being charged with publishing classified material. So I can say that during the testimony earlier today, it began with John Getz, I believe his name is. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is a German journalist with formerly of Der Spiegel. He worked with Julian Assange on the Afghan war logs, as well as diplomatic cables, and he was also working with the New York Times and the Guardian. And what happened is that this entire hearing is based on a total falsehood, because essentially what happened was David Lee and Luke Harding of The Guardian published a book which included a password to a file of unredacted cables, and therefore they made this information open to the public. It was then published on a website called, these cables were published on a website called Cryptome, and then they were published elsewhere first, and then WikiLeaks published this information unredacted, but only Assange is being charged for publishing that material. And he was not even the first person to publish this information. He tried several times to mitigate some damage here and try to work with the US government after they realized that the Guardian journalist published in their book a password to very sensitive information. So it's all based on a lie. It's amazing, quite frankly.
That's all I have. I mean, I just want to know how the family's holding up. I know you talked to Julian Assange's family, and I think you speak to your mom too as well. How are they holding up?
Well, his father is here, and I spoke with him, and we talked about what happened in court that day. This was during the first week, and we had a very intellectual discussion of what took place. I'm sure that this is very overwhelming. This is something very, very difficult to deal with. Not something that I try to address with family as far as like how they're feeling necessarily, but I think it's good to talk to people close to him, because it's very easy to look at Julian Assange as this heroic figure, which he is in a sense, but he's also a human being who has a family, a fiance, 2 young children. So it's always important to remember that as well.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Taylor. Please tell us where we can find you and keep up to date with your reporting on the Assange trial.
Yes, so you can find my work on YouTube with Activism Munich. It's ActTV, Activism Munich, and you can follow me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak.
All right. Thank you so much, Taylor. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you get over to our ROKFIN, ROKFIN, sign up for free, and you can also endorse us for a small monthly charge. You get independent media across the board, ad-free. It's really awesome, and they don't censor us, so that's important for us to do. Also, thank you to our Patreons, and we'll be back in a little bit. We're going to take a little bit of break. We're going to come back. We're going to have the live show. Me and fam got some things to discuss about the populist right. That's the talk right now, so we have to talk about it. So for Pasta Jardula,
Fiorella,
Johnny Sue on those 1s and 2s with Taylor Hudak.
Convo out. Bye, guys.